The broadcast began at exactly 9:43 p.m., with no presidential seal, no government logos, no official announcements. Only the weathered face of John Brennan, former CIA Director, appeared on screen with an expression that had witnessed decades of classified operations and state secrets. His eyes held the weight of someone about to shatter the carefully constructed narrative of an entire presidency. "Good evening," he said, staring directly into the camera with the intensity of a man who had spent his life in the shadows of power. "What I'm about to reveal tonight will fundamentally change what Americans believe about the Bush administration, about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and most importantly, about why thousands of young soldiers died for lies disguised as liberation." Behind him, boxes of classified documents were stacked like evidence in a trial that had never taken place. Brennan's voice carried no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the measured tone of someone who had finally decided that silence was no longer an option. "For over 2 decades, I've carried the burden of knowing the truth," he continued. "Tonight, that burden ends. Tonight, America learns what really happened in the White House war room when George W. Bush and his inner circle decided that Iraqi oil was worth more than Iraqi lives." Barely 72 hours had passed since Brennan received a mysterious package at his Virginia home, a package that contained something no former intelligence official ever expected to possess: the complete audio archives of the Bush administration's most classified war planning sessions. The recordings, delivered by an anonymous source identified only as Patriot, contained conversations that would make every American question everything they had been told about the wars that defined the early 21st century. The first recording was crystal clear, professionally captured, as if someone had known these conversations would one day need to be evidence. And what they revealed was more sinister than the darkest conspiracy theories had ever imagined. "The WMD narrative isn't holding," came the voice of Donald Rumsfeld, captured in what appeared to be a high-level Pentagon meeting in early 2003. "Intelligence knows there's nothing there, but we need something more compelling for the American people." "What about oil infrastructure protection?" responded another voice, later identified as Vice President Dick Cheney. "We can frame the entire operation as securing strategic energy reserves for national security. The public doesn't need to know about the Halliburton contracts already drafted." Brennan paused the recording, his face showing the mixture of disgust and vindication that comes from finally being able to reveal a truth long suppressed. "This conversation took place 3 weeks before Colin Powell's infamous United Nations presentation," he explained. "They knew there were no weapons of mass destruction. They knew Iraq posed no imminent threat. But they had already decided the oil fields were too valuable to leave in Saddam's control." The second recording was even more damning. Captured during what appeared to be a private dinner at the Bush family compound in Kennebunkport, the conversation revealed the true architects of the Iraq invasion, and it wasn't the Pentagon or the State Department. "The Carlyle Group projections are in," said George H.W. Bush, the former president's voice unmistakable even through decades of age. "Iraq's proven reserves are worth approximately $2.3 trillion at current prices. The rebuilding contracts alone will generate $400 billion in the first 5 years." "And Halliburton has exclusive rights to the infrastructure restoration?" asked George W. Bush, then president, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing a routine business transaction rather than a war that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives. "Exclusive and no bid," confirmed Cheney. "We've structured it through defense appropriations. Congress won't even see the line items until after deployment." Brennan's hands visibly shook as he played this segment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are listening to the sitting President of the United States and his father discussing how to profit from a war they were actively planning to start under false pretenses." The recording continued with discussions that revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Maps of Iraqi oil fields had been distributed to Exxon, Chevron, and BP executives 6 months before the invasion. Reconstruction contracts had been pre-awarded to companies with direct ties to Bush administration officials. Even the post-war Iraqi government structure had been designed to facilitate long-term American corporate control of the country's energy resources. "The beauty of the operation," Cheney's voice continued in the recording, is that we eliminate Saddam, secure the oil, and get paid by the American taxpayer to do it. It's the perfect synthesis of foreign policy and private profit. But the oil wars conspiracy extended far beyond Iraq. The third set of recordings revealed that Afghanistan had been targeted not primarily for its role in harboring al-Qaeda, but for its strategic position in what Pentagon planners called the Central Asian Energy Corridor. The Taliban is irrelevant, came the voice of then Defense Secretary Rumsfeld in a recording dated October 2001, just weeks after September 11th. Afghanistan controls the route for the Trans-Afghanistan pipeline. Whoever controls Afghanistan controls the flow of Caspian Sea oil to the Indian Ocean. UNOCL has been trying to negotiate pipeline rights for years, added another voice, identified as Energy Secretary Spencer Abraham. Military intervention solves two problems. We eliminate a terrorist haven and secure energy transit rights that are worth hundreds of billions annually. The recordings revealed that the Bush administration had been in negotiations with Taliban representatives about pipeline rights as late as August 2001, just 1 month before the September 11th attacks. When those negotiations failed, military intervention became the preferred option for securing American corporate access to Central Asian energy resources. 9/11 gave us the justification we needed, Cheney's voice explained in another chilling segment. The American people would never support a war for oil pipelines, but they'll enthusiastically support a war on terror. Same result, better optics. The fourth set of recordings exposed the role of defense contractors in perpetuating conflicts for profit. Brennan revealed conversations between Bush administration officials and executives from major weapons manufacturers discussing how to extend military operations to maximize contract values. Rapid victory is bad for business, said a voice identified as a Lockheed Martin executive during what appeared to be a private dinner at the White House. We need sustained engagement, ongoing reconstruction, long-term peacekeeping operations. That's where the real money is. How do we sell extended operations to Congress? Asked Bush. Insurgency, replied Rumsfeld matter-of-factly. We let some resistance elements remain active. Nothing too dangerous, but enough to justify ongoing military presence and continued defense spending. The conversation revealed a deliberate strategy to prolong conflicts, ensuring that defense contractors would receive multi-year contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The recordings showed that insurgent activities were sometimes allowed to continue specifically because they provided justification for extended American military presence. We calculated that a 5-year occupation would generate approximately $1.2 trillion in defense contracts, Cheney explained in one recording. Compare that to the $200 billion cost of the initial invasion, and you can see why our private sector partners were enthusiastic about the timeline. Perhaps most disturbing were the recordings that revealed how the Bush administration coordinated with media outlets to control the narrative around the wars. Brennan played segments of conversations between White House officials and television news executives discussing how to present the conflicts to maximize public support. CNN needs to emphasize the humanitarian angle, instructed Karl Rove, Bush's chief political strategist, during what appeared to be a media strategy meeting. Fox can focus on the national security justification. MSNBC should highlight the democracy-building mission. Different audiences, same message. This war is necessary. What about the oil angle? Asked a voice identified as a major network news producer. That's not a story, Rove replied firmly. Energy security is a component of national security, but oil is never the primary justification. We have talking points that redirect any oil-focused questions toward broader strategic concerns. The recordings revealed that several major news anchors had been briefed on the administration's preferred narratives and had agreed to frame their coverage accordingly. Editorial decisions about which experts to interview, which stories to emphasize, and which questions to avoid had been coordinated with White House communications staff. The American people don't need complete information, explained one network executive in a particularly chilling segment. They need enough information to feel informed while supporting our mission objectives. Too much detail creates confusion and opposition. The The recordings also revealed the international scope of the oil wars conspiracy. Brennan played conversations between Bush administration officials and leaders from allied nations discussing how to divide the spoils of war. "Tony understands the arrangement," Bush said in a recording apparently from a secure phone call with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. "UK companies get secondary extraction rights in southern Iraq. We take the major fields around Baghdad and Kirkuk." "And France?" asked Blair. "France gets nothing," replied Bush. "They opposed the invasion, so they get excluded from reconstruction contracts. That's the price of being on the wrong side of history." The recordings revealed that post-war contract allocations had been determined before the invasion began, with companies from coalition countries receiving preferential treatment while competitors from non-coalition nations were systematically excluded. European energy companies that had existing contracts with Saddam Hussein's government found their agreements nullified after the invasion, with their assets transferred to American and British corporations at dramatically reduced prices. "It's not conquest," Cheney explained in one recording. "It's market restructuring through regime change." Perhaps the most heartbreaking recordings were those that revealed how administration officials privately discussed American military casualties. Brennan's voice broke as he played segments where the lives of soldiers were calculated as acceptable losses in pursuit of corporate profits. "We're projecting 3,000 to 4,000 American casualties in the first 2 years, said a Pentagon official in a pre-war planning session. "Politically manageable numbers, especially if we space them out over time and emphasize progress metrics." "What's the break-even point?" asked an unidentified voice. "Every American death costs approximately $50 million in political capital," replied Karl Rove. "But each month of delayed deployment costs the energy companies $200 million in lost revenue. The math is clear." Bush himself was heard discussing casualty projections with a cold calculation of a business manager reviewing quarterly losses. "These soldiers volunteered," he said during one particularly callous conversation. "They knew the risks. If their sacrifice secures American energy independence, their families should be proud." The recordings revealed that the administration had predetermined casualty levels they considered acceptable for achieving their strategic objectives, treating American military personnel as expendable resources in pursuit of corporate profits. As Brennan neared the end of his presentation, he revealed additional details about the source of these recordings. Patriot was identified as a former White House communications specialist who had been responsible for maintaining audio archives of high-level meetings. "For 20 years, I've lived with the knowledge of what really happened," said a digitally altered voice that Brennan identified as Patriot. "I watched as families grieved for soldiers who died not for freedom or democracy, but for oil company profits. I watched as taxpayers funded wars that primarily benefited private corporations. I can't remain silent anymore." Patriot revealed that there were additional recordings, more evidence, more proof of the conspiracy. But releasing everything at once would endanger ongoing investigations and the lives of other potential whistleblowers within the intelligence community. "This is just the beginning," Patriot's voice continued. "The Bush administration was only one part of a larger system that treats war as a business opportunity. But now Americans have the evidence they need to demand accountability." Brennan explained that the implications of these revelations extended far beyond American politics. The oil wars conspiracy had destabilized an entire region, created millions of refugees, and contributed to the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. "When you destabilize Iraq for oil access," Brennan explained, "you create power vacuums that extremists fill. When you prolong conflicts for corporate profits, you radicalize populations that see America as an occupying force rather than a liberating one." The recordings revealed that Bush administration officials had been warned about these potential consequences but had chosen to proceed anyway, calculating that the financial benefits outweighed the geopolitical risks. Regional experts had predicted the rise of sectarian violence, the collapse of Iraqi state institutions, and the likelihood of long-term insurgency. But these warnings were dismissed because they conflicted with a timeline needed to maximize corporate profits from the occupation. As his broadcast neared its end, Brennan made a direct appeal to the American people. These recordings prove that the Bush administration lied to Congress, lied to the American people, and sent thousands of soldiers to die for corporate profits disguised as national security objectives. He called for congressional investigations, special prosecutors, and international war crimes tribunals. If we allow this to go unpunished, he warned, we guarantee that future administrations will repeat these same crimes on an even larger scale. The evidence was overwhelming, the implications staggering. In less than 3 hours, Brennan had presented proof that one of America's most popular wars had been started under completely false pretenses for the primary purpose of transferring Iraqi oil wealth to American corporations. The broadcast ended at 12:47 a.m., but its impact would reverberate for years. Within hours, #Bush Oil Wars was trending globally. Congressional leaders from both parties called for investigations. International allies demanded explanations for their exclusion from post-war contracts. But perhaps most importantly, the American people finally had the evidence they needed to understand how their democracy had been hijacked by corporate interests willing to start wars for profit. The Bush family issued no immediate response. Halliburton stock prices plummeted in pre-market trading, and somewhere in Virginia, a former CIA director went to sleep knowing he had finally told the truth about America's oil wars. The question now was simple but crucial. What would America do with this truth?